So we're going to finish up our discussion about art and spirituality, looking at some sacred spaces and sacred places. Shinto is a religion in Japan that focuses on the here and now. It reveres nature itself as a deity. Shinto recognizes the mountain as a sacred object because it's the source of water for the cultivation of rice, and mountains themselves were once worshipped directly, but over time, shrines were built as places to worship the gods. These gods, or nature spirits, are known as kami, and then these shrines became very important to the communities. So the marking of sites as sacred is a common practice in the Shinto religion, sort of emphasizes the way in which natural elements like the sun, mountains, water, trees, etc., are connected to the well-being of humanity and the community. Such sites often start as small piles of stones in an area surrounded by a stone enclosure, but gradually these have evolved to include buildings, fences, gates, etc. We're looking at the Grand Shrine of Ise. This was first constructed in about the 4th to 6th century BCE. And this Grand Shrine is dedicated to the sun goddess, Amaterasu Omikami. The locals visit the shrine to revere the goddess and seek her assistance. So the site is marked by an A-framed wooden building, pretty simple in construction, using natural materials. And it's been in existence since at least 690 CE. And so every 20 years, the site is rebuilt to renew and refresh. There's a special ceremony in which meals are shared with the kami, and so it sort of infuses the act of eating with a ritual significance. Now, you can see there are sort of two parts to this site, and they seem to be rather similar, right? Well, that's because they are. Each time the site is rebuilt, so every 20 years, they build on the opposite side. So then this can decay and be destroyed, and then over the next 20 years, we'll build a new one, right? So it sort of goes back and forth, kind of a sustainable approach to the building and restoration of a site here. And so this transitions us nicely to sort of talk about sacred spaces or sacred places, natural or maybe man-made places that restore the soul of humanity. They sort of allow us to feel connected or feel a sense of peace. They can serve as settings for or serve to inspire rituals, worship, prayer, meditation, things that sort of formalize contact between the earthly and spiritual realms. And so with things like these Shinto shrines, we have the creation of places that people return to again and again and again over long periods of time. Typically, sacred places are for a memorial or religious purpose, and oftentimes these places are decorated with art to sort of give another dimension to the sacred nature. The best-known cave paintings from the prehistoric era are at Lascaux Cave in southern France. These were discovered in 1940, but they date to about 17,000 to 15,000 BCE. This cave system has about 600 paintings and about 1,500 engravings of galloping bulls, horses, and deer. It's one of the greatest concentrations of prehistoric rock paintings, pictographs, and petroglyphs in the world. This site is particularly notable for the compositional and technical complexity of the paintings. Several techniques were used to create the paintings, including the use of sharpened sticks darkened with color for the outlining of animals, as well as the direct application of iron and manganese, the daubing of pigment with moss to produce a dappled aspect on horses, and the blowing of a solution through a hollow reed to create a sort of ephemeral quality that is suggestive of breath or life. Lascaux Cave is often referred to as the Sistine Chapel of prehistoric art because there's this sort of profound level of beauty and skill within the way it was executed. Shortly after it was discovered in the 40s, a French archaeologist and ethnologist theorized that the site had been used as a spiritual place. So Abbé Henri Breuil is the one who proposed this theory. Later, Joseph Campbell called Lascaux a temple cave because he also believed it had been associated with the spiritual, maybe used as a place of initiation or associated with the magic of the hunt. And so the paintings here are especially remarkable because they are sophisticated images that suggest that these artists really had an understanding of perspective in their compositions, which is not a technique that appears again really until the Renaissance. So the natural contours of the walls really enhance the forms here, creating a sense of movement and sort of lending themselves to this sense of perspective within this great herd of animals here. The Hall of Bulls is probably the most well-known chamber within the Lascaux cave system. It depicts cows, bulls, horses, and deer along the sort of natural rock ledges where the smooth limestone ceiling and upper wall kind of meets a rougher, darker stone. The animals here are emphasized by their most characteristic features and sort of rendered in composite poses with the hooves, eyes, and horns seen from the front, but the bodies and heads are shown sort of in profile. There's not really a unified scene. Rather, each of the animals, each of the animals is sort of individualistic. It stands on its own, full of energy, kind of anatomically accurate, yes, but still stylized as well. And so we have all of this overlap, all of the overlapping of forms here. And this sort of suggests perhaps an attempt at perspective or a sense of depth, but really it suggests that the site was visited repeatedly over a long period of time. There's a lot of speculation about the meaning of such cave paintings. In the 19th century, the prominent idea was that Paleolithic humans were acting on an innate desire to decorate their surroundings based on an innate aesthetic sense. But the effort required to create such cave paintings really suggests that there was something more going on. So in the 20th century, we start to get theories about art as a sort of social function. Some people envisioned the caves as places of worship or ceremony, and so the paintings were considered part of rites to strengthen clan bonds or increase food sources. In the 1980s, the common interpretation of these paintings was as a hunting guide for privileged individuals. Some scholars argue that Upper Paleolithic cave art is best understood in terms of shamanism. Remember, shamanism is thought to have originated in Central Asia, and by the Paleolithic period, it was well established in southern France and northern Spain. Shamans were believed to be immensely talented individuals that had been endowed with natural powers that could be enhanced through teaching and practice. And these powers of self-control allowed them to enter trance-like states and in those states they could hear voices and get information from the spirit world. Essentially, they travel outside of their bodies to sort of mediate between the living world and the spirit world. So many scholars argue that the animals depicted and the images recorded here are actually recordings of shamanic visions, or recordings of the spirits and shamans themselves as they move throughout the space to participate in different rituals. So in that case, the animals depicted relate to the real world as well as the world of spirit, because the shaman momentarily crosses the physical boundaries between the two and is able to see with the bodily eye into the real world or the earthly world, and with their inner or spiritual eye into the world of the spirit. Regardless of the sort of changing theories of what these paintings mean, it's typically agreed that they have very special meaning, and that the site is sacred in some way, because people have been returning to this site for generations upon generations. They've put in an immense amount of effort to create these works. It's worth noting that, yes, painters were working in large caverns, like where the Hall of Bulls is, but they were also working in far back regions, in deep caverns that are actually almost inaccessible today. And you can see that here. So the entrance to the cave system leads to the Hall of Bulls almost directly, so this larger area. But if you notice, there are images all the way back into the smallest parts of the cave. And actually, in one area, there is a 16-foot shaft that contained a stone lamp and spears, as well as the only painted scene within the entire cave complex that appears to tell a narrative story. So in this scene, we have a figure, perhaps a hunter, seems to have the head of a bird, or maybe it's wearing a mask. But it lays on the ground in front of a large bison. But if you notice, we have this, let me turn on my laser pointer. If you notice, we have this diagonal line through the bison here. So this is actually a spear. So the bison has been stabbed and disemboweled. So these are the intestines falling out. But we have another sort of bird-like figure or staff here as well. And then another animal-like creature. It's ambiguous for certain. The meaning, again, ambiguous. The bison is quite detailed, while the figure is rather simple. What does the bird head mean? What does the bird staff mean? Presumably, the hunter has killed the bison, but not quickly enough to avoid being killed himself. Is this the recording of a real event? Is this a shamanic vision, or perhaps some sort of ritual or ceremony? We can never know for sure, but the sort of private, small location that this is in suggests some sort of significance. And again, the fact that this is the only scene to have what appears to be some sort of narrative to it also implies significance. And again, many sacred places are places that people have been returning to for millennia. This is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. It was commissioned by the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik, who ruled from about 689 to 705. The Dome of the Rock sits atop the Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary, which is the highest point in Jerusalem. Muslims believe that this is the place from which Muhammad the Prophet ascended on his night journey to heaven to receive God's divine message, as described in the Quran. Um, Jerusalem is a city that is central to the religion of Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike, and so it's considered the site of the first and second temples. It's also considered a possible site of the creation of Adam and perhaps where Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac. Um, so the assertive appropriation of a holy site of other religions sort of allows Islam to proclaim supremacy over those other religions, and supporting this idea that um, Islam completes and supersedes the earlier prophecies of the Abrahamic faiths. So the Dome of the Rock is now one of the oldest works. It was built just 60 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, although at that time it did not have this fantastic golden dome or these beautiful exterior mosaic tiles. So, what is this structure? Well, you would think it was a mosque, but it's actually not. It's a pilgrimage site. So it has this radial plan. So the octagonal building actually surrounds um, the rock from which Muhammad ascended, or the rock from which Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac upon, depending on your religious beliefs. Um, so not necessarily a place of worship, not a mosque per se, but a pilgrimage site, a place for pilgrims to travel in order to sort of pay their respects and venerate the sacred. And so the architectural plan here really allows for visitors to circumambulate that central rock. We looked at the lintel carvings here earlier, but now let's look at the stupa itself. So this is, again, the Great Stupa at Sanchi. It's part of a large monastery complex that was likely built during the reign of Ashoka, so about the 1st century BCE. So a stupa is a Buddhist shrine. It's symbolic of the Great Mountain, and it is considered a mandala, or a diagram of the universe. So I mentioned earlier, the form evolved from earlier burial mounds, and stupas were erected at sacred locations, usually with relics buried inside them. By the 1st century BCE, these large hemispherical mounds with masts symbolizing the axis of the world mountain and mandala, or diagram of the Buddhist cosmos, were quite common. So the dome-shaped monument at Sanchi sort of symbolizes the arc of the sky, and it's thought to contain some remains of the Buddha. It's believed that Ashoka redistributed these remains during his reign, and that some are encased within this particular stupa. Now, we have this stone railing along the exterior here. This is called the Vedika. It's excuse me, it separates the sacred and profane worlds. And then again, we have those 4 gateways, or 4 Toranas, that point in the 4 cardinal directions. So the stupa is considered the axis of the universe. It unites the heavenly and earthly realms of existence. So here we have the lower portion of the stupa is a square kind of fenced area. It represents the terrestrial, and then that is sort of surmounted with a circular area in the dome itself, which represents the celestial realm, and the gods are considered or believed to reside at the summit of the cosmic mountain there. So the devout enter through one of the gates and walk around the stupa in a sort of ritual path. This is a symbolic sort of taking of the path of life around the world mountain. So you circumambulate the stupa at the ground level, and then a staircase on the south side brings you up to another level of circumambulation, this time in a circular pattern, symbolizing enlightenment and the idea that um, the place of worship where the faithful sort of come to commune with the otherworldly spiritual forces, um, is a mandala, or kind of a symbolic diagram of the cosmos that links this world um, with the spiritual world. This is Borobudur on the island of Java, which is now part of Indonesia. It was built in the late 18th century, although it was not known to the outside world until about the 19th century. This is a very elaborate version of an Indian stupa. So again, a shrine and a symbolic sacred mountain. Borobudur rises 105 feet high and is is 408 feet on each side. Um, it's oriented to the four cardinal directions with stairways at four midpoints on each side. And so again, this represents the sacred mountain. It represents Mount Meru, which is the centerpiece of Buddhist as well as Hindu universes. The name Borobudur is thought to mean Mountain of the Buddhas. So the entire site contains 504 statues of Buddha and is decorated with over 10 miles of relief sculptures within open galleries. The relief sculptures have stories that duplicate the journey to enlightenment, so worshippers can enter at any of the openings and walk around the various terraces in a clockwise direction. The base and first 5 levels are rectangular and represent the terrestrial world. The reliefs here illustrate the plight of humanity, moving through the endless cycles of birth, rebirth, death, and reincarnation and suffering. The walls of the next 4 tiers show scenes from the life of Buddha and the Jataka tales, so the past lives of Buddha. In this relief, Siddhartha Gautama decides to leave his princely life for one of aestheticism. And in these sections, the corridor walls are quite high, so it prevents the viewers from seeing out into the landscape, kind of focuses them on the reliefs and therefore on the stories and teachings of Buddha. The 4 uppermost levels are circular, and they represent the celestial realm. These support 72 small stupas. The upper terrace has reliefs that depict the ideal world of paradise, and then the tall walls go away, allowing for this sort of broad view of the landscape, which suggests the achievement of enlightenment or nirvana. And then each of those stupas is hollow, and it contains a statue of a seated Buddha. So really, Borobudur is a 3-dimensional mandala. So again, a mandala is a diagram of the cosmos, or a sort of representation of the universe. Mandalas are traditionally used for meditation. They're supposed to sort of focus your attention. The basic form of most mandalas is a square with 4 gates and a circular center, which is exactly what Borobudur is, right? So we have the symbolism of architecture combined with the reliefs and sculptures throughout that kind of outline a microcosm of all earthly and heavenly existence. And it also creates a sense of Gestalt unity, right? Because the forms and the concepts are aligned. And so moving around and ascending to the summit of Borobudur allows pilgrims to relive their own past lives as well as those of the Buddha and see into the future, mimicking the journey of enlightenment. They ascend from the human sphere of desire to the sphere of form, and finally to the sphere of formlessness, which symbolizes Buddha's ultimate attainment of enlightenment or of nirvana. Chan Buddhism emerged in China in the 7th century, although it's better known by its Japanese equivalent, Zen Buddhism. So Chan relates to the Sanskrit word dhyana, which means contemplation or meditation, and the Japanese pronunciation of Chan is Zen. So Zen Buddhism teaches that one can find happiness and success by achieving harmony with nature, and it teaches that Buddha was a spirit that lives within everyone's heart. Um, in Japan, Zen Buddhism really de-emphasized the traditional scriptures and rituals of Buddhism and placed a new emphasis on self-discipline and self-denial, which really in some ways was returning to the original teachings of Buddha, the idea that individuals could achieve enlightenment through discipline and meditation. Zen monks are devoted to art, meditation, teaching, and typically the sort of ideas of Zen Buddhism really emphasize austerity, simplicity, and intuitive thought, as well as the appreciation of the beauty of nature. So it really combines well with traditional Shinto beliefs and values in Japan. Um, Zen dry gardens have been popular sacred spaces since about the 15th century. This one at the temple in Ryonaji is a flat sort of rectangle of raked gravel. It's about 29 by 70 feet. So we have these low walls that frame the cherry trees, maples, and pines. Now, the trees are on the outside of the wall, but these are still considered part of the garden. They're still present for use for visual meditation. So these Zen gardens were inspired by both Japanese and Chinese culture. So remember, Shinto religion focuses on the worship of kami, or nature deities, and then Chan Buddhism from China emphasizes meditation through daily tasks. So here in the Zen gardens, we have these two concepts together. And the result is a space that represents a microcosm of the larger earthly landscape. So here, the white quartz gravel represent flowing water, and the bigger rocks that are surrounded by moss mimic islands or sort of grounding points within the flow. You can sort of think of them as either islands in the sea or maybe mountaintops protruding up through clouds. The garden maintained to create a sort of serene space for contemplation. Practitioners cultivate a mental sense of calm on their path to enlightenment by emphasizing rigorous discipline and personal responsibility. So the cleaning and maintaining of these gardens, such as pulling weeds and raking gravel, is really kind of meditation for Zen Buddhists. The raking of gravel is a practice that reinforces the impermanence of earthly existence, because any design that is created, no matter how beautiful it is, will soon be destroyed or replaced. This particular garden features 15 larger stones. These vary in shape and size, but the viewer can actually only see 14 at any given time. You can't really align yourself in a way that allows you to see all 15. Only those who have reached enlightenment possess the ability to see all 15 at once. And so these Zen gardens are really designed as places for people to embrace the present moment and really meditate on nature and on life. Here's a close-up on one of those sort of rock islands. This particular rock garden is really celebrated for its severity and its emptiness. You can sort of see in this close-up, the back wall there is rather worn. This is conforming to an aesthetic called wabi-sabi, in which objects are appreciated and valued because of their imperfections, because those imperfections reveal something about, in this case, the passing of time, but in other cases about the imperfection of humanity or human error. Here we have Mark Rothko's chapel in Houston, Texas. This is a sacred space that is a little different. It's a place of worship open to people of all beliefs. So We have this octagonal interior space. The walls hold 14 paintings by Mark Rothko, and he worked closely with the architects on the chapel designs here. He wanted a space in which his paintings could be hung at a certain distance from the floor and presented in low light, shown together in a group to sort of create an environment that enveloped and transported viewers beyond their everyday experiences. The canvases here employ a limited palette of dark colors ranging from maroon to plum to black, um, creating these sort of intense, powerful fields of color that inspire tranquil, contemplative atmosphere and kind of meditation, if you will. This chapel marks a culmination in Rothko's own search for the simplest means of expressing universal truths that are spiritual in nature but not necessarily connected to any particular religious beliefs or doctrines. Rothko Chapel has become a sacred space for worship, and a site of performances and scholarly lectures, as well as a space for visitors to contemplate while being immersed in an experience that really integrates the paintings and the architecture. I'll share the Rothko Chapel site on Blackboard, but from their website, their mission statement, the Rothko Chapel's mission is to create opportunities for spiritual growth and dialogue that illuminate our shared humanity and inspire action, leading to a world in which all are treated with dignity and respect.